question is that this House do now adjourn. Before I call the honourable gentleman, the member for East Kilbride, Strathaven and Lesmahagow, to speak, I should note that he has written to me to ask that I waive the sub judice rule in respect of a statutory appeal to the Court of Session against the decision of a planning reporter to which a number of companies, Scottish ministers and South Lanarkshire Council are parties. This is to enable him to raise the matter of a particular planning issue in his constituency in this adjournment debate. Given the technical nature of the proceedings, which are before judges only, and the fact that no date for a hearing has yet been set, I have agreed to waive the rule so far as is necessary for this debate to take place. However, I ask the honourable gentleman to exercise this freedom with discretion. Mr. Michael McCann.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, competition amongst supermarkets in our country is at times a cutthroat business. Market share and a desire for dominance has meant that in different parts of the UK, competing supermarket chains are knocking quite literally 7 bells out of each other in order to secure new stores. That's all perfectly legitimate if no laws are being broken. However, if you add to the mix the ingredient of public land, then you change the dynamic completely. Tactics felt to be legitimate in private sector supermarket wars cannot necessarily be used when the deal or part of the deal involves a public asset. My adjournment debate tonight is about a veritable supermarket car crash in my constituency involving public land, where it would appear that perspective and common sense were replaced by avarice and intransigence. The net result is a situation where an agency of government charged with creating economic wealth became so detached and consumed by a flawed land sale that it prevented jobs being created in my constituency. What I seek to draw attention to in this debate is the unacceptable behaviour of Dawn Developments and Scottish Enterprise in a land deal in the heart of my constituency, the unacceptable behaviour of a senior Scottish Enterprise executive, and the failings of the civil service to investigate my evidence complaints. I have advised the Minister of the contents of my speech, and as you mentioned earlier, Mr. Speaker, I have sought and taken advice from the Table Office and your office on what I intend to say to ensure that I remain inside the rules of parliamentary privilege. Let me deal first of all with the nature of the deal constructed between Dawn Developments and Scottish Enterprise. The story begins in 2004. Scottish Enterprise, or more precisely the public, owns land in an industrial estate in my constituency in East Kilbride. The site was marketed and 5 bids were received, ranging in value from £2.5 million to £15 million. A bid from Dawn Developments was accepted, which, to reach the agreed price, would have required the local authority to rezone the land from industrial use to retail use and grant permission for a supermarket development. The Dawn bid was £15 million, and they in turn expected to sell the land to Asda for a minimum £22 million, a cool £7 million profit. Scottish Enterprise and Dawn Developments had no discussions with South Lanarkshire Council on the viability of this proposal, nor did they submit a request for the site to be rezoned for a retail use through the established local plan process. Missives were concluded on 25th of October 2007, and around that same time, Alan MacDonald, the chairman of the Dawn Group, met with South Lanarkshire Council officials and was told that the site was not suitable for a supermarket development. Undeterred, Dawn Development submitted a planning application in October 2008 for the creation of a Class 1 retail food superstore. The application was processed and South Lanarkshire Council's Planning Department produced a recommendation that the application be refused, and those documents, Mr. Speaker, are a matter of public record. With the prospect of a refusal in the offing, Dawn Developments decided to withdraw their application before the planning meeting took place. This presented Scottish Enterprise with an opportunity to withdraw from the deal, since the conditions stipulated that parties were released from their obligations once the planning process concluded. Despite this natural break, Scottish Enterprise inexplicably entered into a new deal with Dawn Developments on precisely the same terms. In mid-2009, South Lanarkshire Council received a planning application for a supermarket on a different site from a different consortium. A short time later, Dawn Developments resubmitted a planning application for the Scottish Enterprise site. Their new application was identical to the application which had been refused and had been processed and recommended for refusal. This marked the start, Mr Speaker, of the supermarket war. The Council approved the new rival application, and Dawn Developments withdrew their planning application from the local authority on the grounds of non-determination and then sent it to the Scottish Government. The application was independently assessed by a Scottish Government reporter, and it was again rejected. Simultaneously, Dawn Developments also legally challenged the rival supermarket proposals that had been cleared, accusing the local authority of behaving improperly. Scottish Enterprise, by dint of its relationship with Dawn Developments, was party to this legal move. They took their case to the Court of Session in Scotland and lost. These tactics would be immaterial, Mr Speaker, to the public interest if they involved two private companies slugging it out for the right to build a supermarket in my constituency, but not when one side is partnered by Scotland's Economic Development Agency. A myriad of questions arise. If this was such a good deal, why was the application not promoted by Scottish Enterprise to maximise the return for the taxpayer? Why did Scottish Enterprise not carry out an independent assessment of whether the site was suitable for a supermarket? Did Dawn Developments inform Scottish Enterprise that in private discussions with South Lanarkshire Council they were told that the site was not suitable for a supermarket development? Why did Scottish Enterprise re-sign a deal which had already been through the planning process and recommended for rejection? And did Scottish Enterprise agree to a strategy which saw their partner, Dawn Developments, challenge the integrity of a well-respected local council and take the Scottish Government to court? All of these questions, Mr Speaker, remain unanswered. The Chief Executive of Scottish Enterprise, Lena Wilson, appears oblivious to the fact that the organisation that she commands is a partner in a deal which has cost taxpayers hundreds of thousands of pounds, has prevented a legitimate application which could create hundreds of jobs in my constituency from proceeding, and going back to the original deal, has secured no capital receipt for the taxpayer. Let me now, Mr Speaker, move to the actions of Scottish Enterprise Executive Mr Stephen Gallagher. On the 31st of March 2010, Stephen Gallagher, the Managing Director of Scottish Enterprise Commercial, wrote to the Chief Executive of South Lanarkshire Council, Archie Strang, offering a share of the capital receipt for the West Mains Road site if planning permission for the supermarket was granted. In plain language, Mr Speaker, Stephen Gallagher offered South Lanarkshire Council money to pass a planning application. On 14th of April 2010, Archie Strang wrote to Lena Wilson, Scottish Enterprise Chief Executive, making it clear that Stephen Gallagher's actions could be perceived as an attempt to influence the outcome of a planning application. On 16 April 2010, Archie Strang received a response to his letter from Jim McFarlane, Scottish Enterprise Managing Director of Operations, which stated, and I quote, "Can I first of all apologise unreservedly that this letter has been received by your council at this present time. This simply should not have happened." It further transpired that Stephen Gallagher had also written to the Council's Planning Department on two separate occasions, objecting to the rival supermarket application and asking the Council to favour the Dawn Developments Scottish Enterprise deal. And this led in 19 April 2010 to Archie Strang writing again to Lena Wilson, the Chief Executive, about the letters the Council had received from Stephen Gallagher dated 6 and 8 April, both of which objected to the rival supermarket bid. Archie Strang said in his letter, and again I quote, "My main purpose in writing to you is to express concern at the apparent attempts by Scottish Enterprise to influence the Council to resist this application and to support Scottish Enterprise's own proposal with Dawn Developments at West Mains Road. This concern arises from the comments made in the letter dated 6 April, where the Council is effectively threatened with a legal challenge if it does not seem to have properly addressed all issues associated with the Redwood Drive submission. This is wholly inappropriate, as it appears to cast doubt on the Council's ability to deal with planning applications in an impartial manner and questions the professionalism and integrity of planning officers." In a response from Jim McFarlane dated 23 April, he stated, "Until your letter of 19 April was received, I was not aware that further letters of 6 April and 8 April had been submitted to your Council. In my view, these letters were ill-advised and should not have been sent. I take the view, Mr Speaker, that at best Stephen Gallagher's behaviour should have been viewed as gross misconduct. I further take the view that the thread running through Mr Gallagher's behaviour was consistent with a reckless attempt to allow the Dawn application to proceed, whatever the cost. But what beggars belief is that Mr Gallagher was not subjected to any disciplinary procedure by Scottish Enterprise, and he was allowed to leave the organisation with a taxpayer-funded severance package. Once again, Scottish Enterprise Chief Executive Lena Wilson refuses to answer any questions on this matter, and those questions include: was Stephen Gallagher acting independently when he issued official Scottish Enterprise letters dated 31 March, 6 April and 8 April? Did Scottish Enterprise management believe that Stephen Gallagher behaved in an acceptable fashion, offering cash to a local authority in return for a planning consent? If not, why was he not disciplined? What discussions took place between Stephen Gallagher and Dawn Developments in these matters? What internal investigations took place in Scottish Enterprise to determine Stephen Gallagher's motivation for writing these letters? And why was Stephen Gallagher allowed to leave Scottish Enterprise with a substantial package funded by taxpayers? Mr Speaker, that brings me to my final point. The abject failure of the civil service to investigate my evidence complaints. Having hit a communications brick wall at Scottish Enterprise, I sought answers from what I concluded was the United Kingdom civil service chain of command. I first wrote to Sir Peter Housden, Permanent Secretary to the Scottish Government, who sadly is fast building a reputation as the SNP's cheerleader in Scotland, asking him to investigate these matters. He refused to do so. He accepted the Scottish Enterprise position without, it appears, even carrying out a perfunctory examination of the facts. Undeterred, I then wrote to his boss, Sir Gus O'Donnell. I assumed that the head of the civil service would not resile from his obligations to ensure that the civil service behaved according to its code, which states it must be accountable to the public and needs to meet the highest possible standards in all that it does. Sadly, he did not. Instead, Sir Gus O'Donnell merely wrote to the Scottish Government and replied to me, reaffirming their original assessment of the matter. So, Mr Speaker, we have a procedure where each complaint I have made has been rejected, not on the basis of an investigation, but rather than on each part of the civil service hierarchy reaffirming their subordinate's position. That, in my view, is simply not good enough. But the question is, what does this now mean for my constituents? We know that the development opportunities that were available and existed in 2004, when the land was first marketed, no longer exist. The world has moved on. We also know that the decision of Scottish Enterprise to enter into a joint venture in pursuit of a larger capital receipt was a blunder, and the resulting loss of perspective dragged it into a totally inappropriate legal battle which challenged the integrity of one of Scotland's leading local authorities. Mr Speaker, I sought your advice in the next matter I wanted to raise, and you have agreed that sub judice rules can be waived, and I will heed your advice to be careful. I am grateful for your decision because it allows me to advise the House that Dawn Developments continues to take legal action against the Scottish Government decision to refuse planning permission for this publicly owned site. The madness continues, but there is a train of thought that, given the collapse of every legal action thus far, this is merely a device to put off the fateful day when Scottish Enterprise will be fully exposed in all of these matters and held to account. Mr Speaker, the reputation of Scottish Enterprise has been tarnished by the actions of its joint partner, Dawn Developments, and they should apologise unreservedly for the lack of judgment on this matter and the damage that it has done to my constituency, and for the fact that it has not created employment opportunities for the many people who find themselves unemployed in my constituency. I haven't worked out if this is a conspiracy or incompetence, or a combination of both, because the questions that I have asked have not yet been answered. But I do know that the behaviour of Stephen Gallagher is, without doubt, wholly unacceptable, and that Scottish Enterprise did absolutely nothing about it. And the question that I ask is why. I would therefore, in conclusion, like to put the following points to the Minister. We all have a mutual interest in ensuring that each component part of the United Kingdom is economically successful, And I therefore ask the Minister to enter into a dialogue with Scottish ministers to ensure steps are taken to allow a proper investigation to take place, that those responsible are held to account, and to ensure that lessons are learned, and most importantly, that an exit strategy is devised for this whole sorry mess. And will the Minister also agree to engage with his ministerial colleagues in the Cabinet Office to examine new methods of working to ensure that an elected member's legitimate complaints are properly investigated and are not simply paper shuffled from one part of the civil service to another? Thank you, Mr Speaker.
I call the Minister, Mr David Mundell.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I congratulate the honourable member for East Kilbride, Straven and Lesmahago, and of course my neighbouring MP in South Lanarkshire on securing debating time tonight. Adjournment debates are an important opportunity for members to put matters of concern on the record, and the honourable member has been able to do that this evening. The issues which have been set out tonight have already been the subject of a great deal of investigation by the relevant authorities. I am conscious that a number of the issues raised are still under consideration by both the Procurator Fiscal and the civil courts, and therefore it would not be appropriate for me to comment on those. The issues raised also relate closely to the decision-making process for planning applications in Scotland and to economic development policy in Scotland. It is important to recognise that these matters in Scotland are devolved and are properly for the relevant local authorities, the Scottish Government and its agencies. I can therefore offer no comment on the merits or otherwise of the applications under question. With regard to the responsibilities and accountability of civil servants, I do understand the honourable member's frustration. However, there are proper processes in place. The Civil Service Code, first published in 1996, sets out the core civil service values and the standards of behaviour expected of civil servants in upholding these values. A Scottish executive version of the Civil Service Code was first published in 2006. On the 11th of November 2010, the Civil Service provisions of the Constitutional Reform and Governance Act 2010 came into force, that places the civil service values on a statutory footing. Under the terms of the 2010 Act, a revised Civil Service Code was laid before the UK Parliament on the 11th of November 2010 and is available on the Cabinet Office website. And a revised separate Code of Conduct governing civil servants who serve the Scottish Executive was laid before the UK Parliament and Scottish Parliament on 11 November 2010. Now, as the honourable member has said, he has pursued the matter of the with the head of the civil service, the then head of the civil service, who fully investigated the matter. Complaints
I'm most grateful for the opportunity. Having worked in the property industry, I know that Mr Gallagher has something of reputation, which I think in Moffat they would call a wide boy. Is the Minister satisfied that the code covers the culture of behaviour as well as the actions?
I'm satisfied that with the terms of the code are appropriate and are appropriately administered. Complaints, as the honourable member will know, regarding the Scottish Government and its agencies, which have gone through those organisations' own formal complaints procedure, can also be raised with the Scottish Public Services Ombudsman. It is for the Public Service Ombudsman to deal with these matters, and it is right that the appropriate avenues are used. The Scotland Office does not have any locus in such matters, and it would not be appropriate for us to take on any investigatory role in relation to these matters.
Grateful for the Minister giving way. Having served for a considerable time in my career as a full-time trade union official in the civil service, and having represented people who work in Scottish enterprise, I know how the procedures operate. And the situation we have here is that I made a formal complaint to the head of the civil service that someone, as I have clearly set out in my opening address, has committed a serious disciplinary offence No action was taken whatsoever, and he was allowed to leave the service with a handsome package paid for by the taxpayer. Those questions have never been answered, and therefore the question I must put to the Minister is, how am I to pursue, to a logical conclusion, questions of that nature when all I got from the civil service was a brick wall being constructed in front of me and my question has not been answered?
Mr Speaker, as I set out in my very opening remarks, the member has had the opportunity this evening to place all his concerns on record. And what I do undertake to do is to ensure that a transcript of tonight's proceedings are conveyed to all the relevant parties that have been discussed this evening, including Scottish Enterprise, the Scottish Government, Sir Peter Howson, the Information Commissioner, and the current head of the Civil Service, Sir Bob Kerslake, so that everyone that has an interest in this matter will be able to see and hear from the transcript the points which the honourable gentleman has raised. But the Scotland Office in itself is not able to take forward a further investigation, and indeed it would not be appropriate to do so whilst a criminal investigation proceeds and civil court matters proceed. But as I said at the outset, the honourable gentleman has used the opportunity tonight, the important opportunity of an adjournment debate, to place his concerns on the record.
I think the Minister has concluded his speech. The question is that this House do now adjourn. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Order. Order.